everyone, and welcome. You are joining us live from Zoom, which we appreciate. We appreciate you showing up in this space and showing up with us. I am going to introduce everyone present in just a moment. And first, what we want to do is just welcome you into this space. This is our very first recording of our story, our healing. We call it Survival. This is going to be a series recorded once to twice a month, depending upon what happens when we sink more deeply into it. And we just want to share how excited we are to invite you into this space, to invite you into sharing what is written on our bodies and in our bones, the stories that reside there. And we also want to just share a content warning. In this version of our story, we are going to be diving a little bit into why we call survival what we call it, what ACEs mean, what does that term stand for, and then a little bit about why each of us have come together and how storytelling helps with our healing. So we want to welcome you into this space. My name is Bianca Edwards with Sacred Apothecary. And first, I'm going to go ahead and introduce April Vince, who is the first one on the left of my screen. Michael Matthews, Beth Zietlow de Jesus, and Miss D. Definitely last but not least. Welcome, everyone. Would each of you like to take a moment to introduce yourselves?
I'm April Vince. I'm with the Cuyahoga County Board of Health, and my background is psychology and social work with a passion for helping people. I've been with the Board of Health for 21 years, so very happy to be here and happy to be a part of this project.
My name is Michael Matthews. I'm the CEO for P5 Ventures. I have over 25 years experience working with nonprofit and community. In this space, I'm the development consultant for A Vision of Change. I'm proud to be in this space to be able to with you.
Hello, my name is Dolores Collins, better known as Miss D. I am the founder and the executive director of A Vision of Change. I'm also a certified community health worker, and I'm here because it's time for our communities to begin healing.
I'm Beth Zietlow de Jesus. I am Director of External Affairs for the Alcohol, Drug Addiction, and Mental Health Services Board of Cuyahoga County. But more than that, I have been a mental health and substance use recovery advocate for over 25 years of my life, based on personal experience. And that's why I'm actually here today, because what I really want to see happen is change. So that we can heal from traumas and maybe not have severity of mental illness at the level that it is, and maybe not self-medicate with substances to try to numb the traumas, fill the holes, and invade those gaps that really just need more care than they get right now.
Thank you to each of you for sharing. It brings my heart a lot of joy to be in this space with all of you. And we're going to just go ahead and dive in. So the first question, what is your understanding of ACEs? And when we say ACEs, what we mean is adverse childhood experiences. And so April, I'm going to go ahead and toss it to you if that's all right.
Looking at it from a clinical standpoint, as you said, ACEs is adverse childhood experiences, but what does that mean in the real world? With real words, what does that mean? So something that you witnessed or you were a part of or didn't have a choice to be a part of before the age of 18, there are several things. There's actually a test you can take, and if you Google ACEs test, it'll come up, and it's 10 questions. You answer the questions just yes or no, and depending on how many you answer yes to, the theory is you have a higher chance later in life of developing different chronic diseases, including being more vulnerable to substance use disorders. So we're kind of approaching this trying to look at a community. How can we get at what's happening in the homes before it happens so that the trauma doesn't occur, so that person, is supported by the community and they're not put at high risk later in life for different chronic diseases or substance use disorders. For example, and I'm sure that Beth's going to go into this, but have you grown up in a home with poverty, or do you have a family member that has substance use disorder? Do you witness violence? Those are just several examples of the type of questions. So that's more of a clinical definition, and I'll let the community give more of the real life definition.
Okay, so ACEs, adverse childhood experience for me, growing up in what they call the ghetto, um, and as April said, is living with alcoholic parents, um, living in poverty, and not knowing that that's what it is because it's a way of life for most of us. Um, coming but from maybe domestic violence homes. Um, a lot of the situations or the traumas that April mentioned, excuse me, is actual real life events and situations that all of us deal with on a daily basis. So it's learning and knowing that these are traumas. For a long time, I didn't even look at how I was raised or the things I experienced in my adulthood were actually traumas. So adverse childhood experiences and traumas and so many terminologies that you're going to hear is so new to me, but it is actually life, real life experiences for so many of us. That's what adverse childhood experience is, coming from Ms. D. Thank you.
And I can speak to it a bit from the lens of what adverse childhood experiences can mean for mental health, physical health, and for substance use. So if you are a person like me who is raised in chaos, in alcoholic family, there are some things that go hand in hand with that. There are defense mechanisms that can come to light that serve you maybe to save you in some roles. They can be as simple as using humor inappropriately, or as in-depth as resorting to violence as a reaction to the circumstances surrounding you. And when you grow up like that, you sort of lose sight of who you are, or pieces of you, and there's little missing holes, or at least in my experience. What that can do is cause a constant state of stress in your brain, which releases additional cortisol, which keeps your body in a constant state of fight or flight. And the physical, your brain gets used to being in that constant state, and so does your body, and that's how it reacts. And your organs work harder and your brain works harder, and stress, anxiety, and depression tend to creep right in, because they're chronic brain illnesses that are imbalanced hormones in your brain. That's what happens physically. And so many times when there's those holes and those gaps and the inability to see who you authentically are, who you want to be, people will lean on substances. They'll numb that. At first it brings relief, but the more somebody uses substance, the more likely they are to become physically addicted to that substance and end up with a substance use disorder. When you come from a family that has predisposition for alcoholism or substance use disorder, your chances go up by almost 75% that you will also have a substance use disorder. And so when you look at that, that piece of it, that moving part of it, you see that if there's early interventions, if there's supports, if there's recognizing those adverse childhood experiences early enough on the upstream end of this, that we can shape the way a person's life develops. We can fill those holes with positivity, resilience, coping skills, emotional healing, and people will be less likely to lean on a substance to heal that hole. They might recognize when they're feeling anxious. They might recognize when they're feeling depressed, family supports may allow the people in their lives to recognize that stress or recognize depression or anxiety, and intervene early enough to provide supports. The earlier we intervene in stuff, the less likely it is to get super severe. So early intervention, dealing with ACEs on a different level, healing our bodies, healing our brains is going to reduce leaning on substances for healing, and also can reduce risk for mental illness. That was a really long-winded, sorry.
That's okay. Very informative. And also, I love how you use the word shape. So often, when I have been in spaces with other somatic coaches and healers, we often talk about body, and we talk about how our body holds all of the stories, whether it's how we sit or stand, whether it's how we make eye contact or don't make eye contact, and really what happens on the insides of us, with heart rates increasing, with how our bodies actually produce through our food and actually hold ourselves. So there's so much that's in there that I think each of you have shared and uplifted, because ACEs, while it, sounds like a very interesting term, it actually encompasses what it actually means to live on this world. As Miss D said, it means growing up in the home that you grow up in and knowing that this is your experience and this is your living and it's your everyday and it's your normal. And then having conversations with other people and figuring out that they have a different type of normal, and that normal doesn't mean it's good or bad. Each of our experiences help us take the shape that we're in now and give us some opportunity to even take some different shapes in the future, which I love and think of as an invitation.
Yeah, can I add something? I think it's important, kind of as you're kind of looking at the video, there's a diverse cross section of people, but I think it's also important to understand that ACEs is not about race. There's a whole lot more that goes into it, and oftentimes, like individually, we look at, I am a product of my race, my skin, and therefore you put that kind of out front as the reason behind why you go through these things, but it is cross races, it's cross genders, income. There's a variety of things. I know kind of we're in this space of DEI and kind of talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion on both ends as a positive and as a negative. I think if anything, kind of in our current COVID environment has taught us what comes kind of from nature to kind of make things equal has really no bearing on race. So every race, every person goes through similar experiences. They go through different experiences. I think the important part of it is to have communication. To whereas Bianca, as you mentioned, like you go through certain things, you talk to a person that you may not think you have any connection with, but it's that communication to realize that beyond race, we are all connected. So people here mentioned growing up in homes with domestic violence and alcoholism. It's everybody goes through those particular things. So we definitely want to make sure that communication is key.
Thank you for that, Mike. And you actually kind of talked a little bit, started to lead us down the trail of why we're all here. So why have each of you said yes to stepping into this space?
I can talk a little bit about the background, kind of why formally we walked into the space, and then informally how we all came together. Um, so it started with a grant that we actually got. It's from the CDC, but there's many partners. There's National Public Health Institute, and then Michigan Public Health is involved, as well as Hamilton County. We all have our different projects, but us specifically, we wanted to address a narrative change in the community. So not just looking at ACEs and what was happening in the community, but what did it mean to the community members, and how can we change how ACEs is viewed? More like Mike was saying, like we're all tied together, all of us have experienced something. How can we work on that together and uplift each other rather than looking at it as these horrible things that happened or things that you experienced throughout your lifetime? And but now how are we growing together to change that stigma around different things that happen, and how are we healing together? So I think that's definitely why I am here. And that's what brought us actually to working with the Vision of Change, because they do a lot of work in the community around that narrative shift.
And from, I guess, in order to explain how we got involved, I need to explain a little bit what the ADAMHS Board is. So the ADAMHS Board is responsible for planning, funding, monitoring public mental health and addiction treatment and recovery support services. So we look at the needs of our community and make sure there's program in places to help people from zero throughout the entire lifespan. We do that through prevention, early intervention, treatment, and recovery supports. And that covers a whole gamut of programming that we do. So just we connected with this grant through the Board of Health because that's what we do. We're planning for early intervention. We're working on trying to eliminate ACEs or at least make people aware of them. We want people to know that sharing your stories is a way to help other people understand that they're not alone and seek help too, because in the end, that's what we really want. We want people to reach out for help, get the services that they need so that they can start to heal. And that's how the ADAMHS Board got involved. And we will continue to stay involved on the advocacy level and supporting recovery and resiliency in any way that we can, especially to interfere with ACEs and help bring healing.
And as they mentioned, yes, a vision of change was involved because of the initial overall project, but it's very personal too for me because a vision of change came out of a situation that I was faced with my 4 children and my husband at that time going to prison and becoming a single mom and watching my children go through a situation, not even knowing that it was traumatic at that time. It was just, like I say, it was a real situation of watching them being like withdrawn. The older ones that were in school, they failed a year in school. It's like they became locked into this space of where the space the day the trauma actually happened of um, the police coming into the home looking for my ex-husband, turning over the furniture, looking for different. It was so chaotic that it seemed like they were actually stuck in that space and time, and reaching out for help because I knew that it was a this was a really really bad situation, and I had to do something as a mother to help my children. And reaching out, and at the time this happened in the early 90s, and I'm going to get emotional here, but it happened early on for me in the 90s, and reaching out for help for my children. I mean, I called all of the big agencies and got a lot of bad. It was bad, y'all, but I didn't get the help. But a vision of change was birthed out of this trauma. So I'm really involved because this is serious for me and for my children who are adults now. And it was all about breaking that cycle. When I started doing that research about children with incarcerated parents, and I saw that it was 1.6 million children that were dealing with this trauma, like my children, and then going to the prison every weekend and seeing other children that had this spaced out look. And it could have been anxiety and depression, learning that that's what it was, depression and anxieties that they were actually dealing with. It's then that I knew something had to be done. The story goes much deeper, um, but this project, this series is very important because there's so many children in our communities and moms that's dealing with these type of dramas. And we tend to, as a people, and I'm gonna speak as myself, we tend to, growing up in a type of family dynamics that I grew up in, it's like you sweep stuff under the carpet and you deal with it, pull yourself up and keep it moving, and never ever really address all of those feelings that become baggage, right? Um, so this project is very, very important to me. It's something that it's a change and a healing that I know that needs to take place within our communities because we are in the community talking with residents. And there's so many different traumatic experiences that we're all dealing with um, on top of COVID and knowing that it is time. I needed to be able to heal. And that's something that I had to learn to do moving through my life and getting to this point. It was healings that took place along the way with wonderful people that became very supportive of our journey, of the mission of a vision of change. People like Bianca meeting her in workshops and her sharing her experience. Those all became moments of healing for me. So I want to make sure that we create this space not just for myself, but for other people in the communities who need to begin to heal. The secret of change and healing is to focus all of our energies not on fighting the old, right? But it's building, is realizing those situations, those traumatic experiences, and then beginning to build on the new. Thank
Um, I came into this space, um, and it's interesting that kind of as we kind of go and talk through it. Ms. D and I have known each other. I think we talked about this morning over 20 years. So it's kind of like, you're on the highway. It's like there's the turnpike and then there's the regular highway. And then sometimes you kind of see the lane and then you go and you drive a couple of miles and then you kind of see it come back and then you go. That's kind of been our path. We've always been working together. But recently, over the last 5 years, we've actually had the opportunity to work together. So as a part, kind of the initial grant for ACEs and kind of work that we were supposed to do with TANAD, there was strategic planning that was supposed to be done with the group of residents that Ms. D talked about creating Greater Destinies. So we have our first session. You kind of get into the mission, vision, values. You're all dug deep in strategic planning. And then as the people start to talk, there's kind of this discussion over, okay, yeah, this is great, but when are we going to start to get to community? I want to help. I want to do this. I want to do this. So at the end of the first meeting, Ms. D brings up, you know what? You all need to meet Bianca. Um, so Bianca comes in. We have a session. She kind of gets everybody grounded. The meeting is over and we're not 3 minutes off of the meeting before phones start ringing like, you left me like this, we can't. So we basically came together, and that's kind of where this whole organic thing of being able to present kind of views from residents with views from kind of the Board of Health and the ADAMHS Board, having Bianca kind of all of us come together. Because once you hear that from residents, you realize that we are not alone. Everybody has had some type of traumatic experience. And the easiest way that we thought to help others heal was to talk about the things that we have gone through and either how we're still healing, how we have healed, and it's like a big scar, or how things are still wide open. So to be transparent, to be honest. And then even from a personal perspective, I've always recognized that me being a black male in the nonprofit industry was always kind of a point of where else am I? I don't see myself kind of in this space, but at the same time, understanding that I am kind of, I guess, part of the smaller statistics of those that have gone through adverse childhood experiences. So the more that you hear about it, the more I think about kind of those mentors that were guiding me on ways of saying these are behaviors that you should have. And that was it. Just like Ms. D mentioned, there was no name. They didn't talk about it as trauma. But now kind of having this understanding, you kind of see, what my friends have gone through, things that they experienced, drug use, alcoholism, domestic violence, growing up in single parent homes. Like you start to take the test, you start to count. You're like, Now it provides some clarity. So to be able to have this forum, to be able to share what I've gone through to potentially help others, whenever there's an opportunity, I'm always more than willing to open myself up.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you so much, because one of the pieces around that is, being one of the brothers in this space. Like one of my hopes and dreams is that you always feel held and seen. And the same goes for each of us in this space, because I think what's so hard when we talk about why we come together is often we don't end up in spaces like this by accident, right? It's either divine intervention that we end up in spaces like this, or through random meets where we're put in a room with people we never would have the opportunity to meet anyway. And which, and still in its own way is a divine intervention there. But I think one of the things that is really interesting when we start talking about, like, what does it actually mean to choose to come together? There's a lot of work that goes into being in spaces like this, being in spaces where we not only invite ourselves to show up, and because that's an invitation in and of itself, but then the invitation to each other to be seen and to witness. And so what each of you were saying earlier not only resonated deeply with me, because I know we've shared each other's stories, bits and pieces of it, but then there's also this reality that we're all deeply connected, that one of us is not free until all of us are free. Like, there is a very deep root that goes throughout and connects us all. And so your stories are all intertwined the same way that mine is intertwined with each of yours. And so the other piece around that, I think, is that births like a vision of change, and the work that you all do through creating Greater Destinies and through the boards. I think one of the things that it does is it invites each of us to re-envision how we show up in the world, and to make a choice on how we're going to interact with every person that we come into contact with. And sometimes, because of our own stories, that means that we often have to take a step back and get curious around how our story is impacting how we show up, the blocks that are in the way, the different things that we say yes to, the things that we choose to get curious about. Because Miss D, your experience, and I know we've shared this, but being a daughter of someone who is incarcerated has definitely brought me to this space that I'm in now. Having a mother, Beth, to your point of like growing up in an alcoholic home, me being the daughter of someone who died because of alcoholism, like having that be part of my story, there's a reason that we're here with each other. There's something that we see in ourselves that is also mirrored with each other and reflected with each other. And so I can see myself in each of you, and I'm deeply grateful for you showing up in this space. And you all started to do it. But the next question we were going to sit in is, how does storytelling help with healing? And so I'll start a little bit with my own journey. Storytelling for me, and this kind of goes to the point one of you made earlier, in the home, we did not tell our own stories. We lived through our lives. We made choices every day, but we did not tell our own stories. And we definitely didn't tell them outside of the home unless there was no other option but to have to do so. And Miss D, very similar to what I'm believing your children may have gone through from what you've shared. When my father went to prison, I then had to go to school. Like, I remember waking up, seeing him on the news, seeing his case on the news, and me getting ready to go to school. And because my mom had to go to work that day, getting ready, getting my little sister ready, getting us together, and going to school knowing there's a million things that are going on outside of my control, and having that very glossy eyed, like, I'm not sure what's happening here, but I'm showing up. I'm physically in the place, even if mentally, emotionally, spiritually, energetically, I'm not physically here. And so one of the things that storytelling helped me do was I had to, one, get curious about how I was used to telling stories. Because the way I was used to telling stories was to cover up shame and guilt, or to explain why I showed up a certain way, or why I was crying, or why I was being really hard. And then the way that I got curious about storytelling was like, what story do I actually need to be told so that I can heal the piece of me that feels like it's a missing part, and that feels like I'm disconnected? What is the part of me that I need witnessed and I need seen? in order to invite my own wholeness into a space. And also because part of healing from grief is witnessing. And one of my guides taught me a number of years ago that in order to step through grief, we have to know that we are guided and that we are connected to each other. And for me, I really needed to understand that I wouldn't drown once I shared my story. And so storytelling invited in for me a curiosity, a deep curiosity. It also reminded me that while sorrow is a piece of life, joy actually holds everything else together. And then I think the other piece that storytelling helps me with is that it reminds me that I'm not by myself. I'm not alone, that other people are going through these experiences. And also that, like, each one of our testimonies reminds me that the weight is less heavy when it's shared, that it's actually keeping it in my body or not speaking those words out that causes my body to literally physically be ill. And so it also helps, like, to that brain health that was mentioned earlier. Brain health, oftentimes for me and some of my histories with trauma survivors and also with mental health and mental illness, which is really like brain health and brain challenges. One of the things that I learned is that often those who seemed like they were most disconnected were actually just deeply rooted in the pain. They had never moved from that moment, and everything around them was telling them that they had to leave that pain there when that pain was literally eating every piece of their body and their spirit and their energy. And so I think the invitation into storytelling is even an invitation to choose yourself, to say yes to all the things, and to do it in community in a way that means that we have some different opportunities and different invitations for how we show up with one another. And I'm curious for each of you, how does storytelling help with healing, either through your own experience or through your relationship with others?
For me, I think storytelling is something new for me. Growing up as the third oldest, um, and not really being seen or heard at the level that I thought I needed to be seen and heard, right? It put me in a space where I became an introvert. So I kept a lot of my feelings and opinions about things to myself. And I would go and like write it down, right? Just to get it out. But learning how to do it verbally took a long time for me. And I'm still learning how to um, share how I'm feeling in a way where people understand what's going on the inside of me. So storytelling is going to give me that space um, to be able to share those things and the pain, right, um, of what I felt as a child. And some of those things actually carried over into my adult life, right? Um, and then learning at the age of 40 that I had a voice. So this is going to create that platform for me to begin to heal. And you'll hear me say that a lot because there's a lot of things that I still need to heal from. Um, it's going to help me address some of the pain that I felt during that time. It's really going to free me, right? It's gonna free me to embrace me and who I am. Oh boy. All I can do is just say thank you for creating this space for me to be able to tell my story, something that I kept on the inside for a very, very long time. So thank you.
Um, for me, I see it kind of as a progression. So, like when you're a kid, you kind of hear the boys stop telling stories, and like that becomes associated with lying. So, kind of you go through your entire life like, all right, storytelling is the bad thing. Like you don't want to tell stories. If you tell stories, you're gonna get in trouble. So there are kind of all these things that happen as a kid that we normally don't share with one another, just like everybody said. So like my dad died when I was 11. At 11 years old until you're 18 is just kind of something that happens. So I think kind of we talking about like trauma and how it comes from it. Like my most traumatic experiences that even my kids, my wife, kind of even my friends in high school, all go back to my senior year and my first 2 years of college in terms of with basketball and all these things that happen. And then it kind of clicks that the storytelling part becomes impactful when you have a story to tell. So after that, it became kind of a way of saying these are the choices that I made that got me to like this part of life. So I use my life experiences to help those that were kind of coming behind me to not make the same. So like there's a famous poem that I always remember called Bridge Builder by William A. Gould. But he kind of talks about over the chasm and he's building a bridge for those that are coming so they don't have to build the bridge. It's already built. And I see that as kind of my understanding of storytelling, which is why I've been so engaged in working with youth. Um, and even with families to get them to understand that I would want you to know what I know now at the age where I wish I would have known. And in order to do that, I need to be able to share these are things that have happened to me. These are the choices I was faced with, and I made this choice versus that choice. I'm happy where I'm at, but I can see my life completely different here. So as you think about those choices that you have to make, like truly be thoughtful about what this will impact 10 to 15 years from now. And the easiest way to do that is to give them real life, real challenges, be completely honest, open yourself up to questions over why'd you do that. And I always, my son even laughs now, like, Daddy, it's those free throws. Absolutely. So if I make a free throw, potentially I'm not married to my wife and have 3 kids and I don't live in New Jersey because I missed the free throws. I have my life that I have. So um, I love it. But it's definitely a way to engage and build a bridge across culture, across people, across
I want to speak to something that many people have shared is that our stories as children weren't seen. They were swept under the rug. We couldn't share them. They didn't happen outside the home. You couldn't tell them. They weren't there. I didn't know I had a story to tell. What I could see is that my behaviors were starting to be very indicative to me that I wasn't becoming the person I wanted to be. I was making decisions that didn't reflect my inner values or my inner um, vision of who I started to see myself to be. And then I started to see all of these things bubbling up, all the hidden secrets that were in my family life. And personally, I will, full disclosure, and as I say this, I will also share our suicide prevention hotline, which is 216-623-6888. I lost 4 family members to suicide in a span of 5 years, 2 on my side of the family and 2 on my husband's side of the family. And nobody would say the word. What was that? I couldn't process that. And that's where my storytelling began. I could finally recognize that there were pains that happened in my life that were shaping who I was, and that I needed to deal with them. When I recognized that, I joined forces with programs that could assist me in the way that I needed help at the time. I joined a support group for families of people who grow up in alcoholic homes. I reached out for personal care because that is what I needed, but everybody's journey is completely different. What actually helped me heal, though, was saying it. I talk about the hard topics. I talk about addiction, and I talk about what happened in our life as a direct result of addiction in my family and alcoholism. I talk about suicide because it is something that impacted my life. in each of those deaths by suicide, there were children left behind. And those children have that ACE, right? There's that impact, there's that life experience. And when no one's talking about it, no one's acknowledging, one, that their loved one exists and was not a perfect human, but just needed an escape from the pain. And that the way that they got to their escape from pain is a way that leaves pain behind for others. There's no intentionality to hurt their children. They probably love their children more than anything in this world. But there are children living with this pain, and there are still families and peoples and community who just want to keep it silent. And that silence equates to me as stigma. And stigma is what continues to take lives. If people who struggle with substance use disorders and addiction, or come from families where there's substance use and addiction, continue to feel less than, continue to feel as if they don't deserve the same love, care, medical treatment, and behavioral health care treatment that they deserve to heal, that stigma is going to continue to bury those stories. And every time another story gets buried, that's one less person who can hear and be inspired by the next story, who can learn from someone that, man, I was down and out. This is how I reached out for help. This worked for me. May not work for you, because everybody's journey is different. But storytelling is the ability to share our journey, help other people connect, maybe even to the situations, just so that there becomes awareness in themselves. And then there's always the option for connecting to help. For me, talking about suicide, talking about addiction, I don't feel shame and guilt about those. And I hope and pray that no one has to feel that again. I know it's true that people feel it every day. I see it every day. So I just want to say that storytelling shapes and builds and helps people recover and find help and lean on resiliency. And that's what I want to share.
I don't know if I can compare to those stories of storytelling. I mean, just to echo everything that Michael and Misty and Beth have already shared, I think, no one used to, like we said, no one used to talk about everything. It was just kept inside and kept in your home, and no one shared anything. And so no one knew that other people were going through the exact same thing. So I think the power in storytelling is it binds us together. Like, it gives us a commonality. We're all humans.
I feel that, April. Storytelling is how we survive. And often our bodies can only hold so much. And while they hold contradiction well, we often don't give them the space to actually do that. And so part of the power of storytelling is that it actually gives our body the ability to let go of the things that don't help us survive, that actually are silently killing us internally from the inside out. And storytelling invites us to vision out something that sometimes we can't even imagine because we haven't sat in the wisdom of the pain. With that, I just want to thank each of you who have been panelists today for showing up, for being authentic, for bringing the whole of yourself, and for being willing and able to witness each other, not just in this moment, but in the work that we all do in the communities that we live in the state that we live in the country that we live in. And I'm just grateful to be in work with each of you that is actually bound by spirit, knowing that the work that each of you is doing on the internal stuff and in the external living community space is shifting it and inviting us to show up differently with each other. It's an acknowledgement that your pain isn't yours alone, that we are here to witness it and carry it with you. That it's okay if you can't breathe through that piece of your throat that holds your pain. That we can sit with you and witness it with you. and invite your body to dump it so that it doesn't suffocate out the brilliance of your life. So this has been such a beautiful conversation, and we've just started really going over the surface of it. We talked a lot about what our stories have taught us, what it means to be in a space of growth and choosing that on an everyday, every moment, every second basis, and honoring when the rest has to be in there as well. Next month, we're going to go a little bit deeper. Some of the faces on here will be the same and some of them will be different, but this is a series of storytellers, of everyone doing what the ancient art of storytelling does, which is weaving together every piece of our stories to be able to see a full tapestry, to be able to make choices from the wisdom that come from some of our deepest joys and our deepest pains. Join us on this journey as we continue moving in space and time together. As we join together on April 23rd for Breaking Cycles through the same platform that you're watching us through now. We invite each of you, as we share these stories with each other on these pre-recorded sessions, to join us by sharing your own story, whether it's through a chat, whether it's reaching out to each of us individually on Facebook or YouTube. And we just invite you into this space to let breath fill your body, to honor that we each breathe and we each exhale and hold brilliance and a whole universe in our bodies. Thank you to each of you who joined us today. Be well until we see you again.